Hey, sports porchers. It's your hockey Jesus. It's me and the counselor. What's going on, counselor?
Good evening, Stevie.
Hey, welcome to our very first. We're going to give it a go. We're going to see what we can do. We're going to talk a little hockey. We're going to go through maybe some Penn's draft choices. We're going to talk about various things that we think the Penguins can do. They got only a short period of time to do it in. Tomorrow night's the big draft, so we're going to talk about guys who have been in Pittsburgh having dinner with the new regime. And what do you say, Scotty? Let's go, huh?
Hey, and Gary Bettman's making owners just a little bit richer in the wallets today, huh?
How about that? What do you think about the NHL adding 2 games to an already, in my consideration, already too long of a season? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I guess we're old-fashioned old guys at this point. I was thinking maybe go back to 80 games rather than go forward to 84.
I was thinking more like 64 or 74, honestly. These seasons can get very long for the players, but it's all about that revenue money. If they can get more money, more eyes on the prize, I think that's what it's all about, don't you?
Well, and if they keep playing cup final games in Florida too, it means there might be some innovation in the refrigeration humidification bug. I don't know, man. Pretty soon we're going to be playing sometime in July.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think it is going to be a July start. Well, speaking of July, July 1st is the free agency start, but we got this little thing called the NHL draft. Before there's been the draft, though, there've been a couple trades that have been going on. What do you make of these trades? Let's first talk about the. I know you wanted to talk about the Paterka trade, so let's start there.
Yeah, Paterka is really interesting to me. I think as you and I have evolved maybe from casual fans into fanatics, and myself having been the hardened hockey dad and watching a lot of hockey over the last 15 years, it's really stunning to me how you hear some of the local guys talk about Paterka, and I'm not going to call anybody out, but put on your public radio or your sports radio outlet, and
Yeah.
you'll hear a lot of this stuff. The funniest one I heard today was, should the Penguins trade Rust for Paterka? And
Well, that's not going to happen.
that was before this person realized, their producer sort of caught them and said, Paterka was traded overnight, but
Yeah.
Rust for Paterka. So one of the reasons I love The Athletic is their analysis, how they look at some of the analytics, not going overboard on it, but I can't remember the number of possession driving time, one of those metrics that they had, and goals for, and Paterka was like one of the worst forwards in the NHL.
Right.
So the mere thought that you would trade Brian Rust, who plays in all situations, power
Right.
play, penalty kill,
Good two-way guy. Yeah.
still has his foot speed at, what is he, 31 now, 32 maybe.
32.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you're going to trade Paterka and give the guy $7.5 million a year when he's a clear defensive liability. And the point at which this team is in, they're going to have to win a lot of 2-1 games, 3-2 games, not just this year, but next year and the following year.
Yeah, that's going to be a problem for the Penguins. At least the way the roster is constructed now. I agree with you. I think Paterka is not the guy they want to go after. Also, another guy that Philly got, Trevor Zegras. I am so happy they did not get him. Now, don't get me wrong. I think Zegras used to be a very good talent. I mean, first round pick. He came in with a lot of hype, mostly because I think he was the guy who started he didn't start it, but he was the guy who liked to do the Michigan. He loved that fancy type of play. But once again, the guy's like a minus 48 in his career in the NHL. Just not a two-way guy. Good luck, Rick Tocchet, making that guy play some defense. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, I think these guys that come in and they're a flash in the pan and they aren't consistent. I mean, it could take time to develop, and they have to be in the right system and coaching. And Buffalo's hard to figure out, just back to Paterka. I mean, to be fair about it, because what's it been now, 27 years or something since they've made the playoffs. I mean, they're
It's
there's
a ridiculous
problems
amount of
there,
time.
and they've been picking at the top of the draft here for like, I don't know, 10 years, and so
They still can't get it right.
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know, but I just think the way we see the league, I mean, the two things that really matter to me, kind of to pivot to the draft a little bit, is, can the guy skate? Number one. And number
Right.
two, do they show hockey IQ? Because, all the other things can sort of come along, but I mean, these guys back to the draft again, even moving away from Paterka, like, if a guy can't skate by the time they're 18 years old, if they're not efficient, it's really hard to change that stride. But and I think that relates exactly to the style that the Penguins are going to play. I mean, it's probably going to be back to a more of a Disco Dan style.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, they just don't have the talent that they had, even 5 years ago, despite them, trying to buy the talent. It's clear that they weren't able to do that, and the guys that they did bring in, like even Dubas bringing in Carlson, clearly Carlson's been a failure here in Pittsburgh. And I was happy to hear that he's willing to remove his no trade clause. Now, he's not going to go he's not going to go anywhere, but I think that's a good sign that he recognizes his style may not be a good fit here in Pittsburgh. We'll probably still have to eat some of his salary to get rid of him, don't you think? If he does move.
yeah, I mean, that's what, all the national guys who I guess are plugged in. I mean, call them insiders, whatever you want, but to your point, I think the cap rising helps things out a little bit. One of the more interesting things about Carlson is that he's due a $5 million roster bonus
Right.
on July the 1st. So, it's interesting to think how Dubas will present that in terms of the market, and how the Penguins may be willing to eat a substantial chunk before July 1st, but maybe less so after,
Hmm.
because they're going to have to pay him that $5 million.
Yeah, you're right. That's actually a really good point, because if they eat that 5 million, they're really not going to want to take another 5 million out of that cap. So, but I don't think that I don't know. Maybe anything can happen draft day, right? They could trade him on draft day for some picks, to not have to pay that 5 million. But it doesn't seem to me that FSG is that money hungry. Meaning, I don't think that 5 million is going to mean that much to the owners. At least that's my take on it.
Yeah, I
What do
think
you
I
Go
think
ahead?
within reason. Yeah, and I think, as it relates to Carlson, I mean, I think that he just wasn't a good fit because of the style the playing Penguins play, and
Yeah.
you need somebody to cover up for him the way that Dumo covered up for Letang so many years.
Yeah, I agree, and that's what they're going to have to do. I mean, I think both you and I agree that some free agent out there is going to have to be a Pittsburgh Penguin. They're going to have to go out and get a free agent to play that left side, no matter what. Even if they do keep Carl's, I think they're going to have to hit the free agent market to be able to fill that spot. Don't you?
Yeah, I don't know how you avoid that. You're not gonna. I don't think you're gonna roll it back with P.O. Joseph.
What do you think of some of these other signings? Ben signing a $1 million contract. He was making like 8 million this year, so he took quite a shave to stay in Dallas. And Riley Smith, formerly of this parish, now signed another a 1 year contract with Vegas for $2 million salary. I think that's just bizarre that you're going to pay Riley Smith double what you're going to pay Jamie Benn.
It
Does Ben just not want to hit the market, and he just wants to stay there, and he wants to make it
well,
friendly enough?
I think Ben's nearing the end of his career, and I think he wants to win. And he's been the captain down there for a long time, so in some level, and I mean, you have a favorable tax situation there in Texas as well, which is a factor. I mean, also a factor in Nevada. But I just agree with you. And I have a sour taste in my mouth of Raleigh Smith just because he was just such garbage here. And, that whole crying thing when that video was played in Las Vegas, I mean, that's forever etched in my mind is just weak.
Yeah, I don't understand how players that professional NHL players who know they can move suddenly are all upset that they did move and then just don't play for the new team. I just don't understand that at all. I mean, Gensel was probably pretty emotional about leaving, but he played his heart out in Carolina, before he ended up at Tampa Bay. You just got to get over that, become a professional. You're out there to play hockey, whether it's for a team that you liked and a style that you got used to or something new. And yeah, I agree with you. And that's happened to the Penguins a little bit, not just with him, that goes back to even Hossa, being a rental player and then not wanting to sign with us. But at least he didn't sign, I guess,
Right.
when it comes down to it. What else? I think let's get to the draft. What do you think? Let's get to it.
Sounds good. I put my Stanley Cup championship T-shirt on. I think tomorrow hopefully ushers in a new era where we at least have some hope to crawl back out of this hole that we've found ourselves in the last couple of years.
I see we have a few people watching us live. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to leave us a message, anything about the draft or the Pens that you might be interested in, this is interactive. So put it in the comments, and we'll try and get to it if we can. And let's talk a little bit about the draft. So what do you think about this draft overall, talent level wise? Everybody's saying, there's not high end talent in this draft, but it goes, not deep, but fairly deep. You can go 10, 12 players depending on who you like, where most of them are the same except for the two big guys, Schaefer and Misa. What do you think about that analysis of this draft?
Yeah, so I'm just I'm gonna give some insight here that probably most people in Pittsburgh have no real insight into, and just how different. I've talked to you about this, Stevie, before. How different the NHL is compared to the NFL. So my son skated in both the USHL and the NAHL combine his 15-year-old year. And it's interesting because when you get invited to those and they take you through the whole nines, and they give you kind of the parent, counseling overview of exactly what's going on with juniors. And the amazing thing is, at that time, I remember this number, the average age of a D1 player was like 21 and 5 months. And the point is that if you think about that juxtaposed to drafting kids at 18, many of whom haven't really hit kind of their final growth spurt yet, it tells you really kind of what a crapshoot it is overall. And I think it's the reason why, when the Penguins were good, why Jim Rutherford was so willing to trade those number one picks, because it's a crapshoot, especially if you're not picking, in and around where the Penguins are right now. And even to reinforce, when you have a high pick, the last time they had a pick this high, it was Derek Pouliot. Right. And remember, the irony there is, I think Pouliot was acquired around the time of Jordan Stahl, and it was Brian Dumoulin. Again, I think that was the same draft year, maybe. But my point is, Dumoulin was kind of like a throw-in and ended up being the far superior player. And Derek Pouliot, who was picked, I think, 12th overall, only played about 40 games in the NHL. So
yeah, I think he didn't pan out at all.
I think that's the first thing to understand, is that, for most of the kids who are drafted beyond the top, let's say 12 to 15 to 20, they're not really going to have a chance to play in the NHL for at least 3 to 4 years. And that was the path that, Brian Rust and Jake Gensel, for example, who were third round picks, right? It's a grind.
Yeah.
So I think you have to start there. So it kind of annoys me a little bit when you get into this characterization of it's a weak draft or suddenly next year's an exceptional draft just because of Gavin McKenna. And we
Of
really
course,
don't
yeah.
know, because even if you look at this draft, James Hagan's, now who's projected in the 6 to 9 range. James Hagan's this time last year was the far and away runaway candidate to be the number 1 overall pick.
Right.
So my point is, with these kids who are 18, years or old or so, things change pretty quickly.
Yeah,
And
no doubt about that. And you're right. Like on the list that I have, Hagen's is still 3 on here, but I mean, there's Frondell, who I think jumped ahead of him, and even maybe Martin or Desnoyers. I think that both of those guys may have jumped him at this point, and a lot of that has to do with size too. And even though Hagen's is listed as 5'10", that probably means he's not quite 5'10".
yeah,
And
yeah,
Frondell's 6'1", and Martone's actually 6'3". So you're talking, that's the big difference, I think. If you look at the list of the draft, even the top 25, almost all these kids are 18 years old. Almost
right.
all of them. I think Schaefer's 17. And there's another kid in there of 17, but he's like 17 and 3/4. Yeah, and that's the issue I think we have as Pittsburgh Penguins fans. Do we think we're drafting a Jake Gensel, who, if we draft him this year, he plays this year? Clearly we're not winning a cup next year. Let's just set it right here. And or are we drafting a Brian Rust? Russ was drafted in 2010, didn't get his start till 2014. But when he came up, he was ready to play. I mean, he was NHL ready at that point. So I think that's going to be the problem for us Penguins fans. We always want to get the Jake Gensels or the Jordan Stalls, but they're just hard to come by. And yeah, could we draft one this year? Sure, we could do that. It could happen that we draft a guy. But I think you're right. I think we should have expectations that aren't Jake Gensel like, but we'd like to get a draft where we could get maybe 3 or 4 guys who can make a pretty good team, and of those maybe 2 or 3 can play up, and then maybe one of those guys plays on the third line.
Well, I think
I
that's the value too of those scenarios of the Penguins potentially trading up. And there are reports out there that Dubas is an acquiring, and I think having the Penguins pick at 11 and the Ranger pick via the Vancouver trade at 12, I think allows them to do that. But you don't want to give up the farm, because there's not, like, outside of Schaefer, I don't think there's really anyone that's considered sort of can't miss.
Well, I think it'd be hard to move out of the first 2 picks. I think those picks are definitely gonna go Schaefer and Misa. I don't see those teams moving out of the first or second. But I think third is Chicago, right?
That's right.
Chicago. I think Chicago, you could buy that pick. I think you could do that because they've been burnt in the past with high picks. Maybe they're going to take the shotgun approach this year and just draft a lot of players and hope some of them pan out. And I think if Dubas can do it, and there's a guy that he wants, because let's face it, from after those 2 picks, the next are kind of the same. But if there's a guy you like and you want to go get him, you probably have to in order to get him 100% sure, you got to jump to that third spot, because that's going to be it's going to be a crapshoot from there down to even where the Penguins pick at 12 now. I think it's going to be whoever you like is going to be there, but you don't know who other teams like. And I think that's going to be an issue for the Penguins if they have to sit and wait. I think that's why they would want to move up to go get that guy.
And I think some of these trades could impact it too. So if you look at the trade for Peterka, Buffalo got a solid young D whose name is escaping me now. We just don't know these guys in the West as well, right?
Yeah, right.
But that could mean that the Mammoth is more inclined to try to take a D, and obviously we know that the top end of the draft is forward heavy. So, I think the trades could impact that too. But for me, I think we just I hope that this works out in such a way that the Penguins can kind of get the type of player that they need. And the
Yeah.
reality is the Penguins they're not hard enough to play against. They need somebody who's going to be a pain in the ass. And, really they don't even have anybody in their system like that. Tanner Howe is a little bit like that.
Yeah.
Who has that reputation for being sandpaper, but he's a smallish guy too. I think he's only 5'10", and, also coming off of a serious injury. So,
Right.
and he's your guy that's not going to be playing in the league for at least 2 more years. So,
So let's look at the names that the Pens might be thinking about. Who of these names, who do you think they're interested? Who do you think they would want to jump up and get? Would it be Porter Martone, Roger McQueen, Radim Murtka, James Hagan, Brady Martin, Jackson Smith, Kashawn Atchison, Carter Bear, Cullen Porter, or Benjamin Kindle?
yeah, I think Martone would be at the top of the list for me.
Yeah.
And the thing about Martone is he's really good in space. I wouldn't say a good skater. I wouldn't say an elite skater, but his hands for a guy that big are freaking incredible. Just watching the tape on him. I worry a little bit about McQueen. I read some reports that from scouts that say now he's closer to 6'6", maybe even 6'7". And at some point,
You
I
think
think,
he's too big?
yeah, and the same with Marta. I think Marta's 6'6". I worry a little bit about those guys, who look like they lumber around on the ice. That's just me. But definitely Martone. I also saw something that Dubas was really high on Hagens, which again, an elite playmaker, but another smallish guy. The one who is really also sandpaper, Steve. I don't know if he was on your list there. I don't know if the Penguins met with him. Is Martin, Brady Martin?
Yeah,
Um,
Brady Martin's on the list.
yeah, he's
He's a center. Yeah.
yeah, he's not a real big guy, but has a reputation for playing a pretty tough game down
Yeah,
low.
he's 6 foot 186, so he's a little light, but that just means he's got space to grow, and that would be a good thing for him.
Yeah, but I suspect. I mean, ideally the Penguins would get a second line center, but back to our conversation earlier, I think, moving up, they could potentially get a guy who might be able to help halfway through the season next year,
Yeah.
potentially.
Mhm.
And to give, just as a further evidence of how quickly this can change, you and I talked about Zeev Bunyam in the playoffs a little bit. And, Zeev Bunyam was picked 14th last year, but I think if you redrafted, he probably would have been a top 3 pick, again,
Right.
based on the year that he had in Denver.
And your point about Roger McQueen is well taken because he's already had back injuries. So, if he's going to get bigger and he's going to play that physical game, we've seen the back injuries with Mario back in the day, and those are just something you can't do anything but sit. You can't play when you have those back injuries, and you never know when it's going to flare up. So, yeah, caution beware if they're going after him. I think that they need to go after a grit player myself, and I don't think I know Hagens has got the talent, and unless I don't think he's got that good of a talent. But I think they also got to go after a defenseman. I think they're going to have to eventually do something about defensemen. And to me, I don't know. I like Jackson Smith. I think he fits the bill, and I don't think they have to move up to get him. So I think that's the problem the Penguins are going to have. If they move up, they're not going to be able to get 2 players. If they stay where they are, they're going to have to play the waiting game and see if maybe somebody drops to them. And I think that's when I watch the draft tomorrow night, that's what I'm going to be looking for. Well, we'll know right away if they're going to make a trade, because my guess is once that third pick comes and goes, that nobody else is going to give the Penguins a chance at moving up. But I think Chicago is their only chance. So if they don't do that, then I think the draft is much more interesting if they don't. If they move up, they make their pick, and I guess we can go to bed early. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with you on the defense. That's why after watching film and highlights, I like Aitchison more than Smith. I just think Aitchison's a little bit more of what they need, and he's really physical and also has some offensive talent and ability. I think what's interesting to me is that
He's a better skater too, supposedly.
yeah, I think, and I think having, Smith is an interesting footnote for viewers we have locally. We'll be playing hockey at Happy Valley next year, so
Yeah.
that would be sort of an interesting dynamic, and that would generate a lot of excitement about him. I think fans would obviously be following him if they would pick Jackson Smith, but
Right.
I think the good thing about the draft being so forward heavy, because again, for those of you out there that haven't been following it, the sense is that after Schaefer's picked at number 1, there won't be another D picked maybe until 10 or 11 or 12.
Right. Yeah.
So I think there's a pretty good chance that the Penguins could move up in that 11 pick and move up, say, if they could possibly move into the 7 or 8 range, they could still get one of the top forwards and then potentially be left with, some combination of Murda, Aitchison, or Jackson Smith. That would be ideal. Again,
Yeah. If they don't have to give up both first round picks.
yeah. I mean,
And
maybe Sidney
who knows?
Crosby should go down to the Igloo and stick handle on the McDonald's logo or something as the draft is starting off. I don't know.
For a little good luck. Well, they didn't
Yeah.
have good luck when it came to that lottery for the draft pick. Looked like they were going to be in it there at the very end, and then suddenly it just all went downhill from there. I don't understand that lottery, but that's another subject for another
Yeah,
day.
it is. We could go down a rabbit hole on that one.
Yeah. So I think there's really no sense to talk about second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth round picks, right? All these guys that are being picked down there, you don't know. Maybe they'll find a Brian Rust, but they're just too many drafts, too many people out there at the draft, right?
Yeah, and I think to your point, I mean the two names that I think really to watch based on the reporting is I think you're right. I think we're right. Like Jackson Smith and Aitchison. I think that the Penguins interviewed both of those guys, and they both have been sort of linked to the Penguins in one way or another. And let's face it. I mean, the Penguins really need probably more immediate help on the back end.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be great if we could find the second line center who, would definitely be ready to play in the 26-27 season. That would be amazing. I don't think that's going to happen, but based
Yeah.
on this draft, but somebody who could potentially come up, because we have a big hole there next year. I mean, well, we kind of have a big hole there now. Sorry, 71, but you know,
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that maybe, they could give Koivunen a chance at second line center. He has played some center in his career. Maybe Braz, but I don't know. I don't think Braz is going to be fast enough to play that second line center. Hey, they got 22, almost $23 million in cap space. Why not just go buy somebody, place them in
yeah,
that second?
that
I
that
think I
well,
think that's good money well spent.
yeah, and I think that's going to go up next year too, right? That's going to be over 30 next year.
Well, think about next year. I mean, you got Hayes's contract coming off, Achari's contract coming off, Lazat's contract coming off, Malkin's contract coming off. I think next year, and clearly they need to fill some of those spots, but I think they're already looking at like 50 million in cap space next year. And let's face it, they're not gonna spend all this 22.9 million this year. They're probably going to pocket some of that, or maybe that's what they'll end up doing rather than spending it on the cap. They'll just spend it on things like getting rid of some of these guys. One thing we didn't talk about, and we probably should, because we all know the goalie situation here in Pittsburgh is absolutely horrible. What are they going to do there? I mean, you got to bring up one of these two goalies, but they got so much invested in Jari and Ned. I just don't know where there's going to be space. I heard there's going to be pure competition. Best player is going to stay, but I don't know. I just don't believe that when I hear it.
Well, everything brings me back to trading Ned. I don't, Jari's contract is unmovable just because of the length. And, if there's one major mistake that's Dubas is going to just be sort of, saddled with, it's really giving him 5 years when he could have given him 3 or maybe 4.
Yeah.
But it seems to me, Ned's on an expiring contract, and as much as you love, Ned's compete level and just sort of the fight that he has and the emotion that he can show, and he clearly wants to win. The reality is he's a solid backup goalie. Um,
No doubt.
and at 2 million a year, there's a market for a guy like that can come in and can start for 10 or 12 games consecutively. Like, he just can't carry the load. So
Right.
I think you have to trade Ned because he's tradable. Jari's not tradable. And you have to hope that Blomqvist like can rebound a little bit. And if he can't, then you have to hope for the guy behind him. But I
Murashov. Yeah.
yeah, I don't even want to think about bringing him up next year. I think he needs to play unless he goes to Wilkes and just puts it on fire the first 30 or 40 games. I don't think you can bring him up and rush it, because I think they rush Bloomquist
Yeah.
in some respects.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right about that. But I just think when it comes to push comes to shove, they got to bring one of these two younger goalies up here. They got to start being like Fleury did, Granted, Fleury number 1 overall pick, moved up to get him, and it was worth every penny, and they played him from the get-go. But my goodness, he was not good at the beginning, and you just have to go through that. And I say go through it now, because the next year, maybe the next 2 or 3 years, it's not going to be playoff hockey. I hate to say that out loud. I think they'll still be competitive. Don't get me wrong. They'll be. I don't think it'll be awful hockey, but that leads me to the final topic I want to get to. Hey, by the way, if you've been we picked up some viewers. Thanks for stopping by. My name's the Hockey Jesus. Me and the counselor Scotty, we go back a long ways. We've been talking hockey since the early 80s, since we went to high school together, and we just love hockey, certainly Pittsburgh Penguins hockey, but just hockey in general. What we're doing now is we're giving a little analysis of what the Pens are going to be doing in the draft, what's going on in the NHL. And right now, what I want to be talking about, Scott, is what's up with the new coach, the assistant coaches. Do you like the moves that Muse has done, the guys that he brought in? And how do you think some of these new guys coming up are going to fit?
I love it because a great leader knows the type of people that they need to surround themselves with. And let me say, first of all, these guys are all winners. And I think Muse's reputation and how the national team development program has been elevated over the last 5 to 10 years, really since he was there, is pretty impressive. And then
Hmm.
bringing in Nelson, a guy who coincidentally played one game for the Pittsburgh Penguins in the NHL many years ago.
I didn't know
Um,
that. That's a good one.
he's
Good,
he's a,
good
he's a
tidbit.
winner. He's won for several AHL teams. He's been on the coach carousel as a potential pick. And then Nick Bonino, talk about draft. I think Nick Bonino was a 6th rounder. The projection on most 6th rounders is to never play in the NHL, maybe to play in the upper European leagues and, earn a nice income for 7, 8 years. But Bonino, man, is a guy who punched above his weight as a player. The guy played on a broken freaking leg, man.
Yeah.
Like, talk about heart, character. And the important thing, and we texted about this when that was announced. The players are, Nick Bonino can call no bullshit with the players. And
Yeah.
I think that's so important for Dan Muse because Dan Muse never played higher than D3 college hockey. And,
Right.
some guys may have a little bit of an attitude to him. Like, what do you freaking know?
Yeah.
And Benino's there. And because he's been a teammate of, some of the vets and the core three, he's going to have instant credibility in the room. And he was really, really well liked too. And, I think is a good, just, fantastic signing.
Yeah. Well, going back to that Todd Nelson signing, he was with the Hershey Bears. So of course I called the doctor up. My brother lives in Hershey. So I called him up and he said, and I talked about this on the porch. So I apologize if you guys are porch listeners and heard this once, but he said, that he's a guy, he'll call people out and he said, once he's done with somebody, he cuts them loose. Like he doesn't keep players that he knows won't fit in the system. And that'll be refreshing because I think for years, the Pittsburgh Penguins were a place where, people could come and they could stick around and, just kind of get a paycheck. I think those days are going to be over quickly here in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, you gotta earn it. So I just I love it so far. I love the choice rather than a has been or never was. To me,
Yeah.
it just and the reputation. There's nothing not to like.
So last subject we want to hit. What do you think about who do you think's going to make it? Who do you think's going to be coming up here? At least, at least to get a shot, during the preseason to come up and really have a chance at making the team. And I'm just going to cite some names. Do you think Sam Poland's going to make it?
Yeah, I think unfortunately, as much as I want to be for that guy, and I admire what he did, coming out and being vocal about his mental health and taking the step back. I just his skating's really really hard for me to watch. And I just a big guy like that, he needs to have some foot speed to get in and out of the corners. He can't just rely on his power game. And
Yeah.
it seems to me that he's probably a guy growing up, he was able to rely on his power game. And the NHL game has been a little quicker for him, and he hasn't been able to adapt. Again, that's just my opinion on him.
Yeah.
You know,
So you're saying probably not going to make it.
I think he's going to get a chance, and with the way this team is, to your
He'll be
point,
a bottom six guy, right?
yeah, I
Gotta
think
be.
to be fair, the guy's never really gotten more than I think 5-7 games at a time.
Sully
He
never wanted to play him. You're
Yeah,
absolutely
he
right
he
about that.
really he really he's kind of earned, a 12 to 15 game minimum stretch, and to try to figure it out. And it's not necessarily about putting points on the board. It's really about, is he in the right spot? And some players say, a good player knows what to do with the puck. A great player knows what to do without the puck. I think, if you see Poulin doing the right things without the puck, he should get an extended look.
I agree. Pusty, is he gonna stay? Is he gonna come up? Is he gonna stick around?
I think we've kind of seen what he is. He is what he is, and I think to a similar extent that was Ponomaranov, and I think that's why Ponomaranov went back to Europe.
Yeah.
Um, I think that he knew that he was really never going to be anything more than an up and down fourth liner.
Yeah.
And it's just so tough. Like, there's such a fine line between the AHL and the NHL. Despite, he obviously has a great shot that he can unleash at times, but I don't see him. To me, who are you going to put out of the lineup to bring him in? We joke about Nola Chari, but you get more out of Nola Chari than you do
Yeah.
Puustinen.
Yeah. He's gonna Chari's at least gonna block shots, get in the way, and not be a minus player for the most part.
Yeah, and
I agree.
I'm definitely not gonna take Blake Lizotte out of the lineup for Puustinen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the 2019 class right there, because they traded Laguerre to New Jersey in the fall. So that basically means the 2019 draft is a bust. So let's jump to the 2020 draft. So there's nobody left basically in that draft. Ponomarov was the guy that you said went back to Russia, and they got Bloomquist in the 2020 draft. So I think he's definitely a potential guy who might make a run at coming up. Clearly, he played last year, so I think he's a possibility. So that gets us to the 2021 draft. So of the 2021 draft, and Pens didn't draft all these guys. So there's Koivunen and Braz. They look like the two guys from the 21 draft who have a chance. Do you think either of those guys are going to be up here?
Yeah, Koivunen, kind of the opposite of Poulin. I mean, Koivunen's not a big guy, but he has the pace and the foot speed, and really it's his first three steps.
Yeah.
So he can, and he showed that he can play with Sid. So I think there's a real high ceiling on him. I think the interesting thing on Koivunen and a lot of these guys, no joke, we were talking at the outset about the new 84 game schedule. Like,
Right.
how does Koivunen do in the grind of an 82 game NHL season?
Right.
I think that's the big deal. So I think the team really needs to be aware of that and manage it for a guy who's never, really played that many games before.
Well, that might be the advantage of having so many potential, unknowns. You can give somebody a 20 game stint, and if they didn't play that great, you could always bring somebody up and plug them into that same position. So what do you think about Braz?
Yeah,
You think this
you
is
know,
his year?
Tristan Braz, I mean, put on, I think my understanding's put on about 15 pounds since he left Denver. He's a Minnesota kid. I'm for him. And he got better throughout the season last year. I think he had mono. Is that right?
Yeah, he
It's
got sick. Yeah,
a lot of people are saying that,
he lost a lot of weight. Yeah,
right. The only reason he didn't come up is because he developed mono. But I think he could be a solid fourth line, potentially even a third line guy.
hmm
He might be at some point, down the road could be an upgrade over Danton Heinen for sure,
yeah.
Um,
I mean, and he can play center or the left wing, so
right.
he's a little versatile that way. And I think that's his advantage. He can play either position. So if you bring him up, somebody gets injured, you don't have to worry about him not being able to fill that spot, whether it's on the third line or maybe even on the second line. But the only thing that I heard about him was he's got great leadership skills. Guys that came up from Wilkes-Barre last year talked when they were asked about Braz. They said the guy is just a leader. People follow him. When he speaks, people listen, and I think that's really important. We got to have more character guys like that coming up now that the old guys are on their way out the door.
No
Let's get
doubt.
let, let's jump to the 2022 draft. So this is a really interesting draft. So you're talking Cruz Lucius. That's Murashov, the goalie. We don't need to talk about the goalie. McGroarty, which wasn't our pick, we got from Winnipeg, and Owen Pickering, 2022 draft. Do you think? I don't think Lucius is ready. Do you?
No, I think when you talk about Lucius, I mean, you have to give a nod. Feel really bad to his brother. So twin brothers, Chaz and Cruz. Chaz just had to announce his retirement from hockey. They're Minnesota kids. I watched them a little bit growing up.
Wow, he's
And
20 years old and he had to announce his retirement
yeah,
from
yeah, he
hockey.
has some kind of rare condition that, it was really, really unfortunate. Someone sent me his ex post, and when he announced that is just really, really sad. But he was actually, I think, he's his whole life he's been the better of the two brothers. So
Yeah.
I think it's hard for me to really see a path because from a style standpoint, I think, again, we have a lot of these guys that are, sort of really scrapping, and they're never going to be anything more than, fourth liners, most
Yeah,
likely.
right.
Um,
So I'll mark him down as a no. What about McGroarty and Pickering? Both of these guys saw time last year, a little bit anyway.
yeah, I think McGroarty, I mean, I hope he can continue to work on the skating.
He
You know,
looked better when he came back up later in the year. I
he
think
he did look
everybody said that.
he did look better, and I think the thing that I would say is it seems McGroarty is his hockey IQ can make up a little bit for that lack of foot speed. I do worry a little bit that we maybe lose that trade ultimately. Braden Yeager, completely different player, but Braden Yeager is an
Yeah.
exceptional skater.
Yeah.
And so
Well, they
well,
traded for McGroarty. Everybody knows this. I'm just going to state the obvious because they wanted somebody sooner. They didn't want to have to wait.
right,
So that was
right.
the reason. And he did play last year. There's no way Yeager plays last year at all, you know?
Right, right, but by the same point, you potentially lose your second line center, another year or 2 down the road, so it's a
Yeah,
trade-off,
you're
but
right.
I
It's a good
really
point.
I think he's a guy that, honestly, like, Sidney Crosby could turn him into a 20-goal scorer,
I
just
agree
because
with
he
you
has a
there.
good enough shot, and
Mhm.
if he can find soft areas in the slot, Sid's gonna find him.
Definitely.
So,
Yeah.
he's a guy that if he plays with Sid, and I think again, like, sending him down last year was the right move to make because he's a guy that needs to be playing top 6 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, and he wasn't gonna get that early in the season when the Pens thought they had a chance. I'll tell you what, I'm very high on Owen Pickering. I wish they didn't send him down last year when they did. And then he got injured in Wilkes-Barre and he missed some time. I think he's a left-handed defenseman. I think he's got to be on the roster, at least in a bottom six pairing, don't you?
Well, I mean, the hard thing is, we have Ryan Graves that we're paying all this money for,
I
and
get it. I
I think
understand.
I think when you look at Pickering vis-a-vis Ryan Graves, I mean, you see similar players. Guys that both are pretty big. Neither of them seemingly want to use their body. Positionally, they're more sort of reach guys. Be positioned than they are be physical. But Pickering's probably a better skater than Graves.
Right. That's what
Um,
I saw.
so I just again, it's just like some of the length of these contracts, and when you look at Graves and Jari, 5-year contracts there really hurt us. But I think the thing you have to be with Pickering is realistic. I don't think by any chance Pickering's ever going to be a top pair guy, and
Right.
if even if he's in your second pair, you're not real excited about that. But if Owen Pickering is your fifth defenseman, I don't think that's a bad thing. Um,
Yeah, and
you
that's
know,
exactly where I'd place him. I'd bring him up. I'd put him on that third pairing, and just spell Graves. I get it. There's no way you're going to get rid of that contract. You're not going to get rid of Graves, but you can't waste a first round pick. 2022. I mean, this is year 3. You want him to play this year, and if he doesn't play this year, he absolutely has to play next year. He's got the talent. For me, I think he belongs up. That gets us to the 2023 draft, which was a complete bust. That's the thing, when the Pens were getting rid of all those first round picks, they just have draft years where it's like no hope of anybody coming up at all from
nope.
those drafts because they're all third, fourth, fifth round picks if they're still in the system. That would have been Jaeger's year. So
Was
that's
was was Emil Pinamini in
yeah,
there?
Penamini's there. He's only 18 years old. So, I mean,
Yeah,
I guess it's possible he could
they're pretty high on him, and he was
yeah.
like a 6th round pick.
Well, I think he needs to come and play in Wilkes-Barre. I think that
Yeah,
would be the king. That would be the key. He played in Finland last year. don't ask me to pronounce this name. I will nowhere near come close to what it is.
I
So
love it.
that gives us last year's draft, which, last year's draft, everybody knows we got Brunicky and Tanner Howe. I think everybody really loves Brunicky. And maybe I'm saying it wrong. Maybe it's Brunick. I've heard it both ways. But I like him, but I just think, and he plays the right hand side, so therein lies the problem. They got a lot of right hand defensemen. Um, any chance he's going to make it up for a spell at least this year?
They seriously thought about keeping him last year, so I can't imagine that they wouldn't. I mean, especially if Carlson is moved, you would have to think,
Well, I think you're right. I think if Carl's moves, I think that's that. I think you're right. I think they would definitely give him a chance then.
yeah, it opens some spots. I mean, the one thing about him is he does have another year of junior eligibility, so again, you have to be pretty sure. You mentioned Jordan Stahl, who's the rare case, like who
Rare
came up and
case.
was ready so quickly. But, because a guy like that, you want him playing wherever he's playing, you want him playing at least 16 to 18 minutes a game.
Yeah.
If he's going to be here and he's going to be on the third pair, like that's not good for his development.
Totally agree. And there's another guy last year we need to absolutely talk about. He wasn't drafted, Melvin Fernstrom. They're really high on him. He's shown tremendous growth over in Sweden. He's playing in the high league now, and he like doubled his points in the same amount of games that he's played over there. I guess he's just tearing it up. I think he's going to be something to watch. I know he's young, and I'm not saying he's a phenom by any stretch of the imagination, but I think he's maybe our best talent down there.
Yeah, I mean, just think of what could happen in 2 years, how that trade has looked if the 12th overall pick develops and we get Fernstrom. You're going to look at that and think, "Holy cow!" And
Yeah,
you just don't know. Again, back to the top of the
you
show
don't.
when these guys are picked at 18. You know, most of them, sort of still have more zits on their face than they do common sense, yet
Yeah,
alone growth or development. So,
right. Yeah. Hey, Chris Schott is in the house. Hey, Chris, what's going on? Let's see what Chris has to say here. Let me show this for you, Scotty. Do you consider the Pens a fast team, or do you consider us a physical team, a big team, a small team, an offensive team, a defensive team? That's a really good question, because the reality is we won't really know until we see. Good question, Chris. Welcome to the porch. Good to see you again. Um, I think we are not going to know until we see what system Dan Muse implements, don't you?
yeah, Chris, I think they were formerly a fast team that really lacks an identity, if you want to know the truth. And earlier I told Stevie that for me, it's important. I want to see them draft at least one of these two picks. I want to be a guy that has total grit. So I think they need to be more physical. They are on the smallish side now. I don't know if you just jumped on, Chris, but earlier we talked about a couple people. Porter Martone would be, sort of a dream for them to get, but he's projected to go maybe around 5 or 6.
Yeah.
Brady Martin is a guy who's not big, but extremely physical and gritty. And then Kashan Aitchison, who's a defenseman, who's extremely physical, probably the most physical of the top picks, and he's been linked to the Penguins. So, if they could get one or two guys like that, they could change the identity within the next couple of years. But for me, they have to be more physical. And anyway,
Well, it's a copycat league, and you saw what Florida did. They just beat the snot out of teams, and they were really talented. So it's not just about the physicality; it's what you do when you wear the other team down. And Florida definitely took advantage of that. I think you
well
make some.
said.
I think you make some really good points, though. When you're watching the draft tomorrow, see who they draft. Like, if they move up and they draft Higgins, they want to play a fast game. I mean, he's probably the fastest skater, the most talented winger other than Misa that is going to be drafted. So I think that will set the tone. I believe that they're gonna go bigger. I think they recognize they got to get bigger. They may go out in free agency and get somebody proven for that second line, maybe even another winger to play with Gino, because let's face it, he didn't play with anybody last year. And so I think that's where I think you'll see the Penguins get an identity. The reality is we don't know. I think that's safe to say. Don't you think so, counselor?
I agree. And one thing I would put in here is we talked a little bit earlier about Brian Rust and some of the potential trades here. And to me, I think somebody would have to want to sell the farm for me to get rid of Brian Rust, because I think right now, if we have any identity guys kind of that are focal points of the team, I think it's Brian Rust. And wears it on his sleeve, when you think about, the way that he plays again. So I'll put that as a question to you there, Hockey Jesus. What would it take for you to part with Brian Rust, whose no movement clause expires here in a short 3 days?
Boy, I tell you what, that's a hard one for me, because I agree with you. I think he's proven that he can come up, and I think he's where he's going to be now for a few years, and his contract's pretty friendly, Ah, and the reality is Raquel had a really good year. I'm going to talk about both of them because I think that either of them would move, but I would put it this way: I would not trade him for just picks. I would not trade him just to move up. I think that would be an absolutely ridiculous thing to do. But would I trade him for I would have to trade him for equal talent, to be honest with you, which is why I don't think they'll do it. I think if they're going to trade him, they're going to trade him for like that team, whoever that team is that likes him, their top prospect and probably a pick next year.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't think that's necessary, because one, it's not like it's the Graves contract or the Carlson contract. It's very friendly. And even if he does, nod off a little next year, which I don't think he will, I still think it's a good contract. And I feel the same way about Raquel. But honestly, if they could get a first round next year for Raquel and a prospect this year, I probably would part with Raquel. So that's what it would take for me. I wouldn't do it with Russ, but I would do it with Raquel if we got a first round pick and somebody who was drafted like 2, 3, 4 years ago, who's a prospect that's ready to play this year and would fit that second line center bill. That would be the key. It would have to
Yeah.
be a prospect that could jump into that second line center line next year. That's what it would have to be. That's what I would do. That would be the only reason I would trade Raquel. And
Well, yeah.
I guess I probably would do the same thing with Rust if we got a second line center next year to replace Gino and a first round pick. I probably would trade either, to be honest with you. I don't think that's going to happen.
Well done. I think for me, you just said at the end there. I think unless we were going to get a second line center, who we knew was going to be a second line center, I think I think I've often looked at the Kevin Fiala trade. I think that was Brock Faber. Both teams did okay there.
Yep.
Faber's going to be a top defenseman probably for 10 years. And for me, I think the other point, the only thing you didn't say is, maybe the most important player, not named Mario Lemieux for the Pittsburgh Penguins. You gotta have somebody that guy can play with. And, I think as long as Sidney Crosby's here, I think if you have an established player up there like Rust, to my point before, you can throw McGroarty in there.
Right.
And you're going to have two guys that are going to score over 20 goals. And I think Brian Rust is a 20-goal guy, you know, for the length of that contract. And the important thing, as I said earlier, it was hilarious, you know, to me that you had people in Pittsburgh saying, well, maybe they should trade Rust for Peterka, when Rust is, you know, a great all-around player and JJ Peterka's garbage defensively.
Yeah,
So
makes no sense.
yeah, yeah.
Well, any parting shots you want to fire off and till we sign off here?
And I just say, for those that are casual fans, it's a pretty exciting time. You know, please tune in and see what the Penguins do, because, you know, the hockey draft in many years is nothing but a blip, especially in Pittsburgh, because I don't know, for what, 10 out of 13 or 14 years, we traded our number one pick.
Yeah.
Now we have two of them. Wow. It's like Christmas with a heat dome.
You might say Christmas in July.
Yeah.
Chris has one final question. He wants to know, do you think that the Pens executives are planning for life without Crosby now? I don't. I'll let you take that to start.
I don't think so. Clearly, they're planning for life without Gino. But
Hmm.
I think Sid's been pretty adamant. I think if they were to unload Brian Rust, I think that really starts to cause him to ask some questions, because again, there were times last year where that top line was one of the top lines in the NHL.
Yep.
And you know, you got to have that, and you know, they still got to put some fannies in the seats. And it seems to me, boy, Sidney Crosby goes out of town, then you know, we're back to the days of 1980, 82, buddy, with you know, the attendance.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I concur. I think they definitely are thinking about life without Gino by announcing they're not going to re-sign him next year, and nobody even knows if Gino wants to play at post next year. They definitely, I wouldn't say threw him under the bus, but they basically made a decision for him, I think, by saying you're not going to be a Pittsburgh Penguin after this year. Who knows? Maybe that'll fire underneath him. Look, we've been on this nostalgia wagon for about 3 years now. And I think it's about time to jump off the wagon. I'm glad Sydney's still on, and I hope he stays on till the absolute end of his career. I would love to see him play 3 or 4 more years in a Pittsburgh Penguins uniform, but the reality is he's not going to be here that much longer. So we made it to the end. I'm going to play the old school music. I'm not going to play the new school music. And what am I going to say? That's it. How about it, counselor? Big draft tomorrow. We're going to sign off now. Hey, thanks for sticking around.
Have a good Friday, everyone.
If you like what you hear, we're on the porch every Monday night at 7:30. We do these specials occasionally every now and then, and we just love it here on the porch. Thanks for stopping by, and I tell you what, until then, enjoy the hockey.